Sometimes life imitates art. This is Robert Manni, host of Guys TV, and this week my special guest is author Jessie Kanzer. We're going to talk about unlocking your inner Zelensky. It all starts right here, right now on Guys TV. You can also catch me on KCAA Radio here in Southern California, Guys Radio, my worldwide podcast, the YouTube and Rumble post worldwide Thursdays, and we're on UK Health Radio all weekend long. Guys TV, Guys Radio, thanks for your support. Okay, Guys Radio is the interview portion of our show, and today we're going to talk about something that we usually don't get into on Guys Radio. We're going to talk about a very active area in the world, the Ukraine. We're going to talk about Volodymyr Zelensky, and we're also going to talk about it from the perspective of some of his teachings, if you will. He's kind of a regular guy in a lot of ways, and putting the politics and what's going on there aside, he's got a lot of good lessons in terms of how to live your best lives. And that's what we do here on Guys Radio. So I'm excited about that. It's new territory for us. My special guest is Jessie Kanzer. And she's got a book. It's called Unlocking Your Inner Zelensky. So it's really about what's inside. It's not about the political situation per se. Lessons we can all learn from an unexpected leader. He's a regular guy. So let me tell you a little bit about Jessie. Jessie is an award-winning author of Don't Just Sit There, Do Nothing, which is about the Tao Te Ching. Unlocking Your Inner Zelensky is a new book. Born in the Soviet Union, left at age 8, former reporter, actress, once found herself on the set of a Zelensky film. And for those who don't know it, and we'll get into all this today, Zelensky was an actor and a comedian. And his backstory in terms of how he became president is fascinating. I'll let Jessie tell that. And Jessie's writings have been appeared in the New York Times, USA Today, Washington Post. She's been interviewed all over the place. She lives in Dobbs Ferry, and the new book is Unlocking Your Inner Zelensky. So I'm very pleased to bring on somebody very new and fresh to Guys Radio, Jessie Kanzer. Welcome to Guys Radio.
Thank you so much for having me, Robert.
My pleasure. So one of the things we talked about before we got on the air is I really want to use this as an opportunity to introduce Ukraine to the people who are listening and watching the show, because we get everything through the filter of our news media, and it's always stilted one way or the other. So let's talk about the country itself. From what I've read, it's a beautiful place. It's the largest country of Europe, and it's a real fertile crescent in the way. It's like great for agriculture and other things. So tell us a little bit about Ukraine, and then I also want to hear about, and I think our listeners and viewers want to hear about your backstory.
Sure. And so you're right. It's the breadbasket of Europe, really, or of the world, as some people even call it, because it produces so much wheat, for example. It's been a huge producer of wheat for lower socioeconomic countries who are struggling now. And that's in the book as well. And Unlocking Your Inner Zelensky, this butterfly effect of what happens when something's off in one place of the world. So that's really affected hunger levels in the poorer countries of the world, because Ukraine was so important in its wheat production for those countries. So Ukraine was the first place I ever went to. I was born in Latvia, which was then Soviet Latvia, Riga, Latvia. Ukraine was my first trip because that's where my papa is from. That's where his dad is from. That's where my grandparents for many generations are from and are buried there. And my dad grew up in a place called Vinica in Ukraine. When we went, we had relatives everywhere there. So we visited Odessa, we visited Kiev, we visited Vinica. And what I remember, I was 5 in my first trip to Ukraine, but I have a good memory. And I remember this very jovial spirit that was quite different from the strict Soviet upbringing that I had, not so much from my family, but just I was institutionalized really the way children were there. From age 2, you're in a daycare center for the bulk of the day. School becomes 6 days a week. And you're really in this very Soviet sort of regime. You become part of it when you're young. But when I went to Ukraine, even though Ukraine then was Soviet Ukraine, I remember a very joyful spirit, from my aunts overfeeding me to just the elderly on the street starting conversations with me. And so even then it was almost like darker, grayer shades of life versus like this bright spirit. I remember that difference from that long ago. And of course, in the last, sadly, it's coming up on 2 years in February. I've been very taken aback by the people. And, there's a quote from one of Zelensky's advisors. He says, in a time of crisis, he's like a lens that channels the energy of the people into a single beam. So the book is about Zelensky. I talk a lot about Zelensky, but it's really the Ukrainian spirit, the modern Ukrainian spirit. And I've been very amazed by that spirit of just even the guts, the balls to stand up to, what was seemingly the second scariest, largest army of the world, just to give it a shot, just to stand up to that, to protect your freedom. To me, that was very inspiring, continues to be.
Now for you live in Dobbs Ferry, New York, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, when was the last time you've been back to the Ukraine? How often do you travel there? How in touch do you have relatives there?
I haven't been back to Ukraine in ages. I've been back to Latvia, Riga, Latvia, because that's my birthplace where I'm from. I have my grandma, my old babushka passed away this summer. She was 91, but she has a cousin who lives in Mykolaiv, which is in Ukraine, and she's the exact same age. So a very elderly woman who still lives there and can't go to bomb shelters and things like that. Just chooses not to, but also can't.
Right.
She's elderly, so she's been living through this. And I have there's a whole Soviet immigrant community here, and there's a lot of us that come from the Ukraine. I have, as much as like my daughter's gymnastics coach is from Kiev. There's a lot of people with connections, but I haven't been back in quite a while. I would love to go back, but in safer times.
Now, just again, for the benefit of our audience, who are very curious, like myself, I don't know that much about the area, but I do know from traveling worldwide is we get some information. It's not always necessarily true. I'll give you an example. I visited Turkey with my family this summer as part of a trip through Europe. And I was always told that, Turks and Greeks, they don't get along. And that's a political thing, because the people there, everybody I spoke to were like, yeah, I go to Greece. We have friends who are from Greece. And then when you look at Ukraine and Russia, there's a lot of Russians who are in the Ukraine. There's people like yourself, they speak Russian. There's it doesn't seem to be, and help me with this, a distinction between that's Ukrainian and that's Russian. It's a whole big cultural thing, which makes this current situation so difficult to fathom.
So Zelensky himself was a native Russian speaker, like me. And in Unlocking Your Inner Zelensky, I think in the very beginning, I go into this sense of identity that this war made me question. And I have understood what modern Ukraine represents is it's not what we see on the news, but it's also not what it used to be. So it's not that Ukraine right now is just fighting for Ukrainians, because there are ethnically Russian people within Ukraine who became part of the territorial defense and took up arms because they want to raise their children in a free democracy. And so it's not a fight between Russians and Ukrainians. It's a fight between a more modern and democratic European way of life that the bulk of Ukrainians want. And by Ukrainians, I mean people who live there. That includes ethnic Russians. It includes Jews like Zelensky. It includes Crimean Tatars who are Muslim, for example. This is not just an ethnically Ukrainian person fighting against an ethnically Russian person. So that might get lost in what we watch in the news. It's really anybody who lives there, who wants to continue to live in a free country and does not want to be ruled by Putin and co.
Okay. So let me ask you this question. It's a tough one, but I'm sure you have a great response for it. And that is, reading in the different types of publications and digital news here, we get both sides of the fence here. So some people say in America, well, Ukraine is very corrupt. We keep pouring money there. Where does it all go? What's the accounting for? And it's always been a very corrupt country. What would be your response to that? I don't know. I'm just getting, I'm filtering.
My response would be, we're also a corrupt country.
What country isn't really?
Yeah, no, the problem for Ukraine has been for a long time being a puppet of the Russian government, of Putin. So in 2014, there was a real revolt. And in response to that revolt, where the people of Ukraine did not want to be ruled by a puppet government. Up to that point, it was there were rulers, presidents who were very tight with Putin, and did his bidding. Ukraine, wanted to have more business with the EU, for example. Those people did as Putin said and did not get more engaged in the EU. So there was the Maidan revolution. There was really a coup. They wanted to cut the puppetry ties. That's not meaning cut ties like, Russian was still very widely spoken in Ukraine, really up until the invasion.
So Putin had his guy running Ukraine for a while.
It was a Ukrainian guy, but very in the pocket of Putin.
Got it. Okay.
Right. So that was the corruption stemmed from the Soviet era corruption. That's what it is. Soviet Union was very corrupt, Russia is very corrupt. There's a lot of corruption. The less democratic a place, the easier it is for corruption to run rampant.
Okay.
Because there's not a checks and balances system. So the corruption they have been trying to get rid of is a Soviet era corruption. Now, Zelensky ran on that. When he ran for president in 2019, he ran based on his role. For those who don't know, he played a president on TV.
Yeah. Well, let's take a half step back with that. Sure. Again, my special guest on Guys Radio, we're talking about our inner Zelensky and what's going on in Ukraine, Ukrainian culture, the Russian culture. And really, we're looking at it at a perspective from culture and like the ordinary person being the best they can be. So let's talk a little bit about, you met Zelensky on a film set. So tell us his backstory, because he's a regular guy. And he had, my understanding is he had a TV show, Servant of the People, I think it was called. And it was about a regular guy who becomes president. And then he's a regular guy and he becomes president. So it was life imitating art. Is that kind of the...
Yes. And they even named their party, him and his administration named the party Servant of the People after the show.
Okay. So how did you meet him?
Yeah. So I'll go back a little back. So Zelensky, like myself, a Jewish Soviet child growing up in the Soviet Union. Back then, not so much difference. One kind of autocracy. So the Soviet Union falls. For me personally, my family emigrated. I was 8. It was 1989. We went through a couple of different countries. We ended up in America, very happily so. We were waiting for asylum status, so we had to wait in other countries, and pursued our freedom, opportunity, etc. here. Now, Zelensky, who was in Ukraine, went through an immigration of his own. Everybody there did, because when the Soviet Union fell, for a long time, it was a disaster. A lot of gangs in the place where he's from, Kryvyi Rih is what it's called, and a lot of gangs on the streets. And he was always a creative person. There's a story, he was trying to play guitar in the street. The gangs accosted him, broke his guitar, and he was always jokey. He always found humor to deal with stuff. And he said, well, I guess they're not ready for my music. So then he went on and pursued comedy, created a comedy troupe. Spoke in Russian then, by the way, it was a Russian-speaking comedy troupe, and continued to slowly over time rise his star, like get to where he wanted to go as a comedian and as an actor. His parents didn't want him to pursue that. He went to law school, but still he kept trying. And eventually, when I met him in 2009, it was his first feature film. That was on his first feature film ever being filmed, and a part of it was being filmed in New York, because the film was about Russian expats living in New York, dating, etc. And he was one of just 3 major stars in this film. So this is 2009, one of 3 major stars, his first big film. I have a tiny little part. I had a lot of fun on this production, a lot of champagne, very Russian production style, over the top. So this guy, met him briefly. In 2019, my brother sends me a text that, hey, this guy you were in a movie with was elected president. And so I've been following him since that moment, because to me, what was so striking was how far he'd come in the span of 10 years. How he was just this up and coming actor who won an election 10 years later by over 70% of the vote. And the story goes that as Russia started tightening its screws on Ukraine, and that happened as Ukrainians were revolting and wanting more freedom, he became more involved and more supportive of this freedom that he wanted to keep. And eventually he created this show. And he said the point of that show, Servant of the People, was to remind folks that this is not how it should be. It was not a show about how things were, it was how things could be. And that's what he wanted to put in people's heads. It didn't have to be like this. It didn't have to be corrupt. tied to Russia so much. So over the top, like the show shows really well how much money is wasted, for example, on unnecessary personnel and unnecessary hoopla that the government,
Okay.
kind of funds. And so he made a name for himself with his show, and the people of Ukraine really connected with that message. And that's why he was able to run and win by such a large percentage.
Okay. And what year did he win the election?
2019.
Okay, so he's actually relatively new in the position. So wow,
Right.
what an amazing journey for an individual to go through, from
Right.
having your guitar broken, playing in the streets,
Yeah.
to becoming president at the hot spot in the world right now, one of the hot spots. Like, amazing. So a takeaway, it sounds like that the beef isn't really between the Ukrainian people and the Russian people, because they have so much in common. It's really political, and it's about Putin's regime versus another country wanting to, like, not stay under the thumb there and be able to do their whole thing. Now, is that's kind of where we're headed?
To a degree, I would add that there are people, Russia has always been, not always, but for a very, very long time, has been a very autocratic place. My own grandparents were in the Stalin camps. It was, and people, it's very easy to brainwash people in a place like that. So I would say, and they've always been derogatory towards Ukrainians and other ethnicities. And so there are Russian people who look down on Ukrainians. That was part of the propaganda of the Soviet Union, continuing of Putin. So I would say, I hope there are people in Russia who still think for themselves. I think there always are, always will be. A lot of them have been jailed. A lot of people did come out and protest within Russia and were jailed. So it's a mix. There are people who were brainwashed by Putin, who support Putin very strongly within Russia. The ones who don't have to sadly keep quiet if they don't want to go to jail now, because a lot of people have been jailed.
Okay. My special guest on Guys Radio, Jessie Kanzer, Unlocking Your Inner Zelensky. We talk about some of the lessons of Zelensky shows us. One is the great power of ordinariness. Now, I think we've seen some of that, because he comes from kind of regular roots and kind of worked his way up and was catapulted into this position. Tell us a little bit about this lesson, if you will, the great power of ordering, for how the rest of us can use this to be the best version of ourselves.
Yeah, and thank you for reminding me of that always, because that's actually how this book was born. Unlocking Your Inner Zelensky was because I saw this guy in real life, and then 10 years later, he was the head of a country. And then soon after, when the war started, I was amazed by his moral clarity to just be like, no, we're going to stand up. And that's what the people wanted. He represented the people. I was amazed by his kind of strength and power, given that he didn't have that much political experience. And so that is his great lesson. That is one of the great lessons that I write about in the book is, when he was elected, he said, I'm not a politician. I'm just a simple person who has come to break down the system. And then again, when he was given last year, he was given the Time Person of the Year award. And he said, every one of us is the leader of our time. And so he continuously kept saying, we're all ordinary people. And in watching how he's been able to not just remain this regular person, but he's been using that to his advantage. So, for example, showing up in country after country, whether on Zoom or in person later, and continuing to wear the green army tee or the sweatshirt, the khaki sweatshirt, what he was doing, and he explained it in one of the interviews. He's like, my country's at war, and I don't want anyone to look at me and forget that, because that's why I'm here. He's there because his country is at war, and he's very good at wearing that ordinariness and using it as part of his message.
Okay. Another one of his lessons that I think we can all learn from is integrity. How may I serve? The mindset. And here in America, we're very much what's in it for me. I see it more and more and more, that everybody's really out for themselves, and it's sad. And hearing words like integrity, sometimes they don't even mean anything anymore, because people don't consider those things, and they're really important. Or how may I serve? I interviewed a wonderful man a couple of weeks ago, Neil Donald Walsh, and he came on, how can I serve? He said that he's one of the world's spiritual teachers, and he came to me on my show and said, how can I serve? He said it like 3 times. So it's so important that we always remember that we are connected. Talk to us about your view and Zelensky's view on that.
Yeah, and I studied with Neil Donald Walsh actually a couple of years ago, so big fan as well. Zelensky has said several times that he before the war began, he planned on just serving for one term. He wanted to change things. He wanted to shake things up because he didn't like one of the things, as you spoke of, was the corruption. He didn't like the stagnation of the government. And so when he was elected, he said, those of you who say nothing can be done, something can be done. Just write your name on a resignation letter and let's figure this out. He wanted to shake things up. And so he wasn't there like for himself. He said, I'm willing, in order to save the lives of my troops. Back then there was just the conflict in Crimea going on. So for those who don't know, in 2014, Russia annexed Crimea, and there was that conflict going on there. It wasn't a bigger conflict yet. He said, for my troops to stop losing their lives, I'm willing to give up my post. If I'm able to do it, and my post has to go, that's fine. So he has continued to keep his people. What is he there to do? To serve his people, right? Servant of the people. The name of the show, the name of his party. When asked like recently, like, aren't you tired? Haven't you gotten tired? And he said, I can't do worse than my people are doing. So the people are tired, but they keep doing what they have to do. I get strength from those people that I'm here to serve. So I can't do a worser job than the people I'm serving are doing. And so because he's puts that service attitude first, like, what am I here to do? To serve the people. So I will wear my green army tee so people know that my people right now are hurting, they're at war. So because he keeps that in the front of his mind, that helps with the humility that doesn't let one think I am all this and I'm all that and I'm at the top. It's a humble way to lead.
Let me give you a little pushback on that. I was just reading an article yesterday about the former boxer mayor of Kiev,
Klitschko, yes.
Klitschko, and he was kind of complaining about, hey, it's too authoritarian now. We can't make our own decisions. And what's your thoughts on that? Do you think that's part of just the stress and the pressure of what's going on in the war? Or
Yeah, I
is
did.
there a division?
Right now he definitely has been getting pushback from Klitschko, who is the mayor of Kiev.
Yep.
I think it's a really hard time. I mean, look at the infighting in our government during, I would say, average times, right? Like everything's relatively status quo in America. I'm not going to say it's okay. There are things that are and that aren't, but there's a lot of infighting. It's a very high stress time there. And there are, I'm not going to take sides because I don't know the details of what Klitschko is talking about, but
Right.
I would think someone who's a, world class champion boxer probably has an ego too. There are probably a lot of egos up against one another. I do know that unfortunately, when you're the president or the leader of a war, you can't be what you would want to be. He's not the kind of leader he wants to be. And he had all these plans for, fixing the infrastructure he'd started. That all went underground. So I think right now there's probably just one goal:
Right. Mm-hmm.
survival and to win and do things. Some liberties definitely gets, swept aside in that goal. So yeah, I think
Okay.
human beings always have beef in times like this.
All right. Another teaching that Zelensky has that you point out in the book is alignment. Now, of course, alignment for the Ukraine, part of it is geographical. They want to be more European and less Russian. And I think probably that actually got under Putin's, I'm sure he doesn't like that at all because he wants to defend Russia and feels that there's a buffer there with Ukraine. If we lose that, then, we're going to lose more and more. So kind of, it's always have to look at both sides. But let's talk about the idea, the concept of alignment and how we can apply that to our everyday lives.
Yeah, and everything you're saying about Ukraine is true too. To point out, because for those who don't know about the country, it's in a really tough spot. So like literally in a tough spot. So we are
geographically in a tough
yeah,
spot.
geographically. It's made me think how lucky we are in America, also geographically, how lucky we are geographically to not have, an enemy right up against us. But I don't think Ukraine or Zelensky didn't want to be Putin's enemy. When this first began, he said, sit down with me. In Russian, he would say, in press conferences, just sit down with me, sit down and let's talk. I'm just a regular guy. But Putin's not a regular guy, so that wasn't going to work. So his alignment, with what I talk about in the book, the alignment, I'm talking about an energetic alignment.
Okay.
And I find that any person who's been able to achieve their dreams is a master of that. So I wanted to write about how Zelensky did that. I want to point that out, because it actually holds true across most people who achieve their vision. So for him, when he was young, he had this vision of being a star entertainer. He got there, his vision shifted. He wanted to help his country break out of this rut, and he got there. And so what I talk about is this energetic understanding that you have to align with what you want before you get there. And in his inaugural address, he said to his people, he said, we all want to be part of Europe, because that was a big reason they voted for him. A young guy, a young entertainer, who very Western in his way of living. So they voted for this guy. They wanted to be part of Europe. And he said, we all want to be part of Europe, but first Europe has to come here. And he pointed to his head. Europe has to be in here. When Europe is in here, he pointed to his head, it will come to our country. And he was trying to teach them this sense of alignment, that you have to internally be what you want to see externally.
Okay, let's take a couple more tips from the book. Tips from Z. Let me read you one. There's about 4 or 5 here in page 42 or 41, I believe. As Z has demonstrated, we build trust with people through transparency and a direct, no BS style of communication. I mean, that's nice. I mean, it can go over the top, because when now we have our political candidates here, they just, you know, they're direct, but are they telling the truth? Watching some of the debates recently, it's just everybody pointing each out. That's a lie. No, you're a liar. No, you're a liar. And you know, the direct style of communication is in some ways refreshing, because we get so much BS. But on the other hand, it gets to the point where you can be direct and it's still BS. It's just loud.
Well, then you have to read at the other tips, right? So
okay,
yeah. So this is, by the way, sure, I will. And this is from the chapter, Know Your Purpose, Know Your Audience, because whatever politically people think, I think everyone can agree that he's a master PR man communicator. He's been able to keep the world thinking about his cause for a very long time. I think it's the reason, honestly, the reason there even has been a fight put up is because he was able to garner support, at least initially. And so, yes, so there's the direct style we talked about, that you talked about, but the one right after that is find a common thread with those you're talking to. That's one. Another one is combine your passion for your cause with humility. And that's a big one that I think some of those direct opponents of each other are missing. So it says, combine your passion for your cause with humility and support it with facts to prove your point. Another thing I found in these fights, I've also been watching these debates, they're just like insults without the backup. So, you know, he bolstered his speeches with videos, for example. He talked about suffering, but he also continually kept gratitude as part of his presentation. He would say, I'm so grateful to the people of America. I'm so grateful to the people of Great Britain. When he would talk in his speeches, I'm so grateful for the support we're getting. So I think, you know, there's be specific in your ask, which he would do, but have a secondary ask if you know your primary one won't be answered. These are good for negotiations, for meetings, business meetings, make your listeners feel valued. And then the last tip being, remember when you're speaking publicly or one-on-one, while you're not Zelensky, you're you. So stay true to yourself. Bring you, the youest you part, you know, to the table. Like we, you know, even as a writer, I've had publicity training. And I've noticed this, and it bothered me a little. I've noticed that one of the things we do in America is we have a way, like this is how you do it. You come up and you do this and you show your confidence and show your, you know, there's things that we're taught that I think sometimes go against a stronger choice of just bringing yourself. If you're confident, bring your confidence. If you're feeling sad, you know, he's teared up in interviews. I think bringing your humanity is just as important as the rules we're taught for public speaking sometimes.
I agree with that. That's a great point. So he also says in the next chapter, actually just be real. And that's part of that, being yourself, the importance of that authenticity. And I think we lose a lot of that, particularly when, as you say, we're watching the politicians kind of go back and forth. It's kind of hard to know who these people are. So what else do we need to know about Zelensky and his teachings?
So one of the things I talk about in the book is these lessons for me, they stand regardless of the outcome of this war. And they stand not because Zelensky's perfect. And there's several points in the book where I point out this is not about perfection. So, for example, maybe Klitschko's right about some of his points. This is not because we're human beings. Everyone's a human being. So this is not about being perfect. And many times he said himself, I'm not perfect. I'm just human. They asked him, how do you want to be remembered? He said, definitely not as a hero, as a human being who loves his family, loves his country.
Mhm.
And when asked, like, what do you dream of? He's like, I just dream of going to the sea, to Crimea. He said, I want to see the sea. So what I want people to know is, within the book, there's more of these conversations from the interviews that he's done. He is just a regular person who loves his family, as he says. And in his job as president, he's had to really look out, not just for his own children, but for the children of Ukraine. And I think that a lot of what Zelensky and the Ukrainians are trying to accomplish comes from this love of family and love of children and wanting to see their future generations have opportunity and freedom.
Mhm.
So that, to me, as an immigrant who comes from the oppressive Soviet Union, that's the reason I'm so tied to this cause, is because I feel that innately. So I have two children in America, and they're so American in the wonderful way that I didn't get to have. I see the freedom in them that it's an innate freedom. And it's a freedom you can only have when you're born into freedom. And so for me, that's what this cause is about. And that's what brings me back to the root of these lessons, of what can we take from these lessons. This is what remaining real is about, like staying true to yourself. It's staying authentic. It's going after what you want and working hard. It's pretty simple. All of these lessons, they're not like, wow, I never thought of that. You probably have. Probably you have thought of this. And this is just a reminder. It's about staying true to that. What are we all trying to do? What do we want for ourselves? What is the vision we want for our families? And working towards it and keeping the humility going, perfect or not perfect. You fall, you get back up again, you keep trying. So that is what I learned from Zelensky. And that's what I try to uphold. Honestly, in writing this book, it changed me and how I approach
Mhm.
things in my life as well.
And that's a great insight and an excellent book. The book is called Unlocking Your Inner Zelensky. My special guest, Jessie Kanzer. Here's the book again for those who are on YouTube or Rumble. Lessons we can all learn from an unexpected leader. One of the other items that he mentions is the importance of sports, even in times of strife and times of war, as sports and the arts, just to keep things going, having those human spirit things available for people that they can relate to, even when the stress level is really high.
Yes, and I love that. Thank you for bringing that up as well, because we forget that not just in times of war, we forget that in times of hardship in our own lives. Like one of the first things to go, and I see that I'm a mom, and there's some moms that are juggling everything, and I see that one of the first things to go is self-care. But if we watch Zelensky throughout this process, he's in his army tees and we see that he keeps working out. We know that. They ask him, he said he works out to AC/DC. That's what he likes. So that is important. He talks about the importance of, and keeping humor as well. If you don't keep that humanity alive within yourself, then there's no point of whatever else you're doing. So continuing to take care of yourself. There's a chapter I have about using your energy wisely. And we all leak energy here and there. We scroll too much, whatever we do.
Right.
To remember to take care of ourselves, and on a country level, on a macro level, he talks about the importance of the chess players in Ukraine and the soccer players in Ukraine, because what's a country if it's just soldiers?
Mm-hmm.
That's not what it's really about. It's about those scientists and those artists, like you said, and those sports that make people happy. It's about remembering all that joy of life, whether it's on that macro level, a country at war, or in our own lives when we're struggling.
We touched on it earlier, but I think it's a really important point, and that is the size of Ukraine. People don't realize it. You see it on the map or you hear about it on the news. I mean, if you dropped Ukraine over the U.S. map, how much area would it cover?
That's a good question. A lot.
It's bigger than it's bigger than Texas or something like that.
No, it's much bigger. It's much bigger than Texas. It would be a chunk of us. I mean, every country in Europe is usually smaller in comparison. Ukraine is not small. And look, Putin is not dumb. There are many ways to describe him. He's not dumb. The reason he wants Ukraine is because Ukraine is such a fertile land. It has a lot to offer.
Mm-hmm. What do you want our audience to know about Ukraine that they may not be getting on the news? Without getting political, what do you want them to know about the Ukrainian people, about the country, the culture, and anything else?
The Ukrainian people have suffered at the hands of the Soviet Union long before this. I don't know if people know this. I mean, they were, during the Stalin era, they were forcibly starved. So Stalin troops came, it's called Holodomor. They came and they took all of their grains and millions of people died. They starved at their hands. Russia has been trying to wipe Ukraine as a culture off the map for a long time. This is a fact. This is not just me getting political. Just, it could be Googled. This is factually, historically true. So it's not just something current, like we don't get along with these people. It's really a existential sort of struggle right now. And the reason that I find it important is because, again, as you said, Ukraine's a big country. I think if ultimately Ukraine is able to succeed and just succeed by just remaining a developing modern country, I think it would be really, really beneficial for Europe as a whole. There's a lot of talent within Ukraine, a lot of artistic talent, IT talent. The IT sector has been doing well even during the war within Ukraine. To me, I would love for all of the world to be a place where people get to pursue their talents, do their best, have opportunities. So for me, the bigger section, the more of the world that gets to be like that, the better it is.
And just to be fair, so what would a Russian's response to that be? Put that hat on. If emotionally you can do that and say, well, yeah, you haven't pointed out the fact that, no, we don't want to, we're not an existential threat, and really that Ukraine should be part of Russia. It always had been up until recently. We don't necessarily accept the fact that it's kind of on its own now. It's been, been influenced by the West, etc. What would the Russians say to that?
I mean, it's hard for me to put on that hat because Ukraine was independent. I mean, this is again, it's a very good example of how hard it is for us to know what the truth is now as a whole, because everybody has their own truth. I think the biggest thing that a Russian would say that I could understand is that they feel threatened by the West, and that having yet another, they really, the thing is, the Russians really, Putin, I'm going to say Russians as people, Putin and people who support Putin really fear America, and they fear American power, and they would just say Ukraine is just it's going to be a satellite American country, and that is a danger to us directly. Okay. So they feel endangered by being up against an American satellite right next to them. Okay.
Fair enough. You mentioned one last thing, because I want to really bring it down to the people again, the joy. You mentioned with all the stuff going on and all the things that Ukrainians have had to go through over the years, you mentioned this sense of joy was the first thing you mentioned. Tell us about that a little bit more.
Because this was also my first memory, but I've seen it again and again. Like, they have been very adamant. Kyiv was getting bombed for a while, and was under threat, under attack. But as soon as they would come up from their shelters, the bomb shelters, the cafes would reopen. And the opera reopened as soon as it could, and the theater reopened. And they really try to live as best they can under these circumstances. They don't give in to fear. And there's a chapter in Unlocking Your Inner Zelensky about, choosing love over fear. I think that they've been very good at that. They've been very good, because again, what I even talked about, Russia's point of view of, they fear an American friendly country being right next to them. The thing is, from my own upbringing early on within the Soviet Union, I know that it is a country that operates on fear, and I think most autocracies do. They control people because they're afraid of what would happen if they didn't control people. So there's things like that. I love this opposite kind of way of living that I saw in Ukraine even in the Soviet days, but that's really blossomed, and it's the opposite of fear. It's embracing life in the moment, even if this moment is all you've got.
Okay, excellent. Unlocking Your Inner Zelensky, my special guest, Jessie Kanzer, lessons we can all learn from an unexpected leader. So, we did tap into the politics a little bit, but I thought it was important to have some type of context. I think really the takeaway is the lessons that an individual, like him or not, Zelensky's going through. He's had an incredible story, personal story, and some of the lessons that he serves up without trying to really serve up lessons. The takeaway from some of his experiences are something that we can all add to our day-to-day existence to be the best people we can be. So Jessie, thank you for being on the show. Where can people find out more about you and your work?
Thanks. So jessiekanzer.com, JESSIEKANZER.com. That's where all of my information is about this current book, my last book that you mentioned, Don't Just Sit There, Do Nothing. And then my books are everywhere books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, indie bookstores. And by the way, this book is also available as an audiobook, narrated by a very talented artist as well. So there's different versions, a Kindle.
Okay, well, thank you so much for being on the show. Let's all hope for peace in the new year, and let's get together, people. It's one world. We're all connected. I know things are complicated, but hopefully love will overcome it all. And I don't mean to sound like Nelly naive here, but it's really, we have to tap into the love and the fact that we're all humans, and let's not be always fighting. All right. So guys radio, thank you, Jessie, for being on the show. Jessie Kanzer, guys
Thank you so much. Thank you.
If you enjoy the guests and content I bring you each and every week to Guys TV and Guys Radio, please support us by subscribing to our channels and platforms. Thank you.